Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming out on this beautiful day. It's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be here. Thanks to the Public Art Endowment and the Science Center. It's wonderful. We had a tour yesterday, and we got to, feed the red panda and stuff like that. It was absolutely amazing. So thank you again for letting me come here. Usually I run around when I give my talk, so I'm afraid that I will forget there's a microphone, but to remind me, okay? Okay, where am I? Okay, well, I start out usually by kind of outlining my background. I have a strong interest in science, my background is in physics, and I'm going there first because I want to explain how I think about art, what inspires my art, and I'll just go in the middle of it, and I'll talk a little bit about science, since it's a science center, right? So you guys have probably heard about the double slit experiment. It was in the early 19th century, the experiment that established apparently once and for all that light is a wave. So you send light through these two openings on the bottom. So through those double slits, and then you see an interference pattern back here. Instead of just seeing two light, bright images of the two slits, you see a dark light pattern. How does this come about? Well, the two portions through the two slits go right in the middle of this screen. They go like this, so they interfere constructively, so you see a lot of light. Right next to it, they shift by half a wavelength and go like this, so they cancel each other out every time they're there. So that's, and you can do that in both directions, go further and further, and you have the same effect going, so there's your interference pattern. So that's all nice and good, but the problem is, or the weird thing is that the same is true for matter. So as you probably know, light is not only a wave. It's also detected as a particle. It's called a photon. And by the same token, everything I'm touching here, this desk, for example, is made out of atoms. These atoms too, these molecules I'm made of, or you're made of, they too obey the laws of quantum physics, and they not only are particles, but they actually move through time and space as waves. And that was what my graduate research was involved in. So we took a really big, for physicists anyways, really big molecule. It's called a Buckminster-Fullerene carbon-60 molecule, shaped like a soccer ball, and sent that through a double-slit experiment. It's a little, harder when you do it in reality. It's not, conceptually it's simple, but in actuality it's a little tricky. That was the setup. That was in Vienna in 1999. We did this experiment. Here's the concept again. So here's a little oven. The Buckyballs, as they're affectionately called, these little soccer balls, they evaporate here and get screened through those collimation slits, then go through the double slit here, and then they get detected by a laser that scans left and right, so it kind of basically knows where the Buckyballs are. So that's the interference pattern. So what actually appears is you have a dark light pattern, only that in the middle there's lots of buckyballs, and next to it you see less and less in this oscillating fashion. So what actually happens is that a single buckyball, detected as one unit, goes through two openings at the same time because it interferes with itself to make a probability that's higher or lower, depending where you are, and then gets detected again as a single buckyball. Now the crazy thing is that the two openings, these two double slits, they're 100 times further apart than the diameter of one of those atoms, of those molecules. So that's crazy, and it's especially crazy given that, as I said, we are made out of those very same molecules and atoms. So all these weird things we learn in physics about quantum physics do apply on a very fundamental level. We think the world is, like this, reliable, predictable, and like it's either there or not there. All that stuff evaporates on the small level we are made of, and we see something like this. That's insane, and that kind of really triggered me to give me, I had always interest in art, but I felt when I was doing my graduate work that I want to really move on and go somewhere where I can talk about that without using words. And so that's, in a nutshell, inspired where I come from as an artist. Okay, so doing that research, I actually met this lovely woman. That was in Italy. I did my very first sculpture. I fell in love with sculpture and her. I moved to the United States. She's a neuroscientist. She at that point, she would put these little green fluorescent proteins, which come from a jellyfish. But that was why I was also really intrigued here by the jellyfish. So it's a little green lantern that makes these specific jellyfish glow green in the dark, and you can stick the DNA that encodes that protein that makes this lantern. You can take that DNA and put it into, for example, like a bunny, a white bunny. Now, this bunny will glow green in the dark when it grows up. So that's the principle, how the researchers use this green fluorescent protein to mark certain things in the brain, for example, and to map what's happening in the brain. Why am I mentioning this? So my research was essentially, I wanted to go towards bigger molecules. I mentioned, you know, we are made out of the same molecules, so it would be really fascinating to go into biomolecules. So the next step was, I thought, protein, something like this green fluorescent protein. So that was still in my science times. But then I came to the US and studied art, and in my very first class, I made a miter cut sculpture. And I realized, wow, that principle, going from one-dimensional building block material, cutting it up in mitered cuts, and then reassembling it without losing any material, turning it from a 1D thing into a 3D thing is exactly what nature does. We go from one-dimensional DNA, it's a strand of information, to amino acid strands. They curl up in space, and they become the building blocks of our whole machinery that we call our body, that makes us somehow experience this world and have pain and joy and all that stuff. So I set out to write code that would transform the protein backbone information, which is known in science. You can get that from the internet. People do the research, and then turn it into cutting instructions to make sculptures. So that's how I came about making sculptures. And then here I am in, I don't know when it was, 2004 or 2002 or something. One actually. I made my first. I wanted to make a green fluorescent protein. That was my goal. That was, you know, I was intrigued by this green lantern, and I wanted to make a sculpture like this. And that was a complete mess. It didn't fit together. And then I realized the beauty about being an artist is it doesn't matter. You know, you can still put it in the gallery and say, failed protein biosynthesis. You know, it's okay. So, and then I finally, actually, a few years later, I actually learned welding, and I made my first protein, and that's my second green fluorescent protein here already. That's now actually at the Friday Harbor Labs, which is the place off the coast of Seattle where they isolated this protein, the green fluorescent protein, from the jellyfish in the 60s. So that's one example for an approach for how I would make a public work for like a science place. Then another one is still as a student, as an art student in Portland, Oregon. I read about this guy, Linus Pauling. You know, he is from Portland, Oregon. He is actually the only person to ever win 2 unshared Nobel Prizes, one for chemistry and one for peace. And I thought that's really a shame that there's nothing to commemorate him. And so I set out I met the people who owned the house where he used to live as a kid. He had his first chemistry lab in the basement. And I said, how about I make a sculpture for them? And in short, that's what I did as part of my thesis project in art college. And that's on Hawthorne Boulevard in Portland, Oregon now. That's in front of his childhood home, which is an element that reoccurs in proteins. It's called an alpha helix. It's like a spirally element. I just took a big steel beam and turned it into that spiral element. Okay, so I'm talking about 2 more protein-based pieces, just to give you an idea of those early days. This one, I got asked by the Scripps Institute in Florida, if I had an idea to make a piece based on the human antibody molecule, which is a very complex, very large molecule, and laser pointer. So it has like these hyper-variable regions here, which click onto like pieces of virus, for example, and mark it for destruction for your immune system. So these molecules are the ones that keep you alive every day, basically. They make sure that you don't die of all these kind of things that are floating around. So my idea was to equate the human body with the human antibody, and kind of where the hands are is exactly where they click on, and it's actually, you know, waves in the wind, if you will, like the arms do. So it's kind of intriguing how deep this analogy actually goes. So, and also really intriguing for me that without distorting anything, I was able to impose the human being there, as in the Leonardo Vitruvian man, onto this molecule without much changes. So I decided to use that as a design. Wait, there should be some. Oh yeah, I used that as a design. You can see that printed on the stage. Those at that point, I just learned how do I make these ideas, which are great and all, but then how do I turn them into reality, which is another completely different story. You know, there's welding, there's technology, there's gravity that really kicks in at some point, and so. Here's, for example, we built this by making a stage, so 2D information is on the floor, 3D information is done by these posts and in strategic points, so we know how high it is. And then there's the finalized molecule that's in my studio back then, and that's installed at the Scripps Institute. By the way, I would like to say, if you have a question, can you just say it? Because that's much easier for me. Because if I don't want to, like, you go over your head or whatever, you know, so just stop me if I'm going too fast. Any questions so far? Okay, So there's one more protein-based project I want to talk about. That's actually for the Center for Integrative Proteomics Research, which is a building at Rutgers University. And that was interesting to me because they actually house the data I've been using for all these years, where I got my structural data from. So the data that I used to turn the protein data into cutting instructions, they are housed there, and they have the protein database there, which is a worldwide really important kind of depository for those data. And so for them as their mascot, if you will, I made a giant a collagen molecule. Collagen is the most abundant protein in our bodies. This is 20 feet tall, and it has, the idea was to have it with 3 different colors of glass windows. So like the complementary colors, red, blue, and yellow, together make all the different colors. There's like a basis system. The idea was each strand, they're identical, but they play their own role. It's like, you pull, and that's very similar to the Science Center, you pull from very different disciplines and then weave that sturdy strand that you couldn't make without any of those very different things. Okay. At this point, I'm going back to the Buckyballs for a second. Yeah. I didn't make it. This glass was from Bullseye. It's a company in Portland, Oregon, and I laminated it, and then I water jet cut it in this case. Yeah, and then we actually welded little frames on the inside, and then popped it against that so we could silicon caulk it. Yeah, technical questions are always very welcome too, because I don't dare to talk about this usually. So the Buckyball, what we saw first, that was a rendering of this molecule, 60 carbon atoms arranged in that space. Mathematically, this shape has been known since Archimedes, and that's an early drawing, again by Leonardo, where he just made it like a wood thing with open faces, and I was intrigued by that. So the first piece I ever made out of college in 2004 was I bought a big piece of sheet of bronze and cut it out and made a buckyball. And then I realized if I cut out the faces, I could make another buckyball, and then I could do the same and make another one, nest them into each other. So I made these 5 buckyballs that are nested and held into space by these 60 rods that are going radially in. And then I'm skipping a lot of stuff here, but on the way then I made larger and larger buckyballs, and here's one I'm making also in the early days still, where I wanted to make a 30-foot diameter buckyball, and I wanted to have it embrace three fir trees, so it would hang in the air, and you could walk under it, and this is what we're doing there. The first time around, I built it from the bottom, and gravity kicked in, and I couldn't get it over this branch, so the second time around, I would build this giant 40-foot on each side scaffolding, build it from the top, and then dismantle the scaffolding as we built the buckyball. Here is that piece installed. That's actually a private yard in southern Portland, Oregon, which is like they have these beautiful trees there. That's when you walk under it. There's a little creek, and you can look up and you see the symmetry of this structure. It's very odd because you don't see it initially. You walk by it, when you're very close, you suddenly realize that there's a piece of steel in the air, and then you just step back and assemble this whole shape. And it's a very interesting and intriguing experience to have nature kind of being like, meshed and intersected with this mathematical constructivist shape. And it's also, I'm not going to go into too much quantum physics, but it has a lot to do also with, what quantum physics tells us about the underlying reality, that things don't have a boundary, for example. Yeah, so that's one of my kids. And I'm showing this cute video because I was puzzled and surprised why I was so intrigued by this buckyball, because I've been doing those for years, and I was like, why are they so cool? And then when she did this, I was like, aha, it looks like this here, So a buckyball is, if you will, a regular version of a 2-dimensional foam on a ball. And so I got all into foam structure, and I made things like this, trying to really basically get the human being into my sculpture and connect it with that idea of the laws of physics and foam, which are actually really beautiful and really intriguing. And so one spin-off I wanted to show Glenn yesterday after he showed us those Voronoi type of things he designed for the Science Center is my windows, because my studio is in a not such a great area in town, so I would want to have bars on my window, but I didn't want to have prison bars because I would be depressed looking out the window. So I designed this foam thing, which is cool because they're always different. All the windows have different patterns, and you can even in principle do like accommodate any odd shaped window. So I had that patent, and I was really proud about that. It was pretty fun. But I'm mentioning it mostly because that whole foam thing from 2006 and 7 like got me on a whole new trajectory where I looked into software that how are three-dimensional solids represented in the computer? And there's a whole slew of amazing algorithms that I started using more and more, especially with figurative pieces. Like this one is an example. The simplest thing is, of course, take a triangle, just a polyhedron out of triangles. This I made in a different scale. That's another example for how I approach a public art piece. This is for Texas Tech University, the Department of Plant and Soil Science. And my idea was to make this very meditative female figure that holds actual agave, which is a plant that's really important for the native peoples in that area. It's medicine, it's food, it's made into drinks, of course, and then it's really an intriguing plant. So I wanted to honor that somehow. Here's some photos from how we made that. That's Darren, and that's Chuck, inside the piece. It's like a U-boat. Okay, there we go. Okay, and then another example, that's a private piece where I took that idea, the same idea, but this time I used glass again. I would slump the glass in the triangles before I would weld the whole piece. And so I was able to make them all bulge out and conform to each of those very different triangles. You know, there's 600 or 700 triangles and they're all different. And it's any questions so far?
Can you explain the derivation of the buckyball? Where does the name come from?
Oh, yes, good question. So it was so carbon and graphite were known for millennia, forever. Those are two carbon modifications. And only in 1985, people found some odd things. First, they looked at giant red stars and they saw very clear spectrums there, and they didn't understand why there were such lines that there must be something of high symmetry, a molecule of high symmetry. And so then the guys who, in 1985, they made buckyballs by shooting a laser at graphite. And they theorized in their Nature paper that based on what they'd seen, Buckminster Fuller had made geodesic domes. They'd seen that in the 1967 World Expo in Montreal. He made a big geodesic dome. And the architect had seen that, or actually the researcher who done the buckyball research was reminded of that and then saw the similarities and figured out that's exactly how the buckyball must look like. And then they showed that they had carbon-60 peaks, and then they said that must be the structure of it, and it turns out that's true. But that's a very recent discovery of a new carbon modification. And it's been really exciting, and science has been used in very different spots. Here, that piece before lives on the inside of this building. That's a private place in Wyoming, and she has a sister outside. She's standing. I have a laser pointer. She's standing there, and same idea on the outside with triangles, but I generalized the triangles into three-dimensional tetrahedral structure on the inside, which, by the way, is really the same as a foam from two-dimensional foam to three-dimensional foam. Only mathematically, it's very related. And then, again, more spin-off of this interest in meshing algorithms. This piece then was a studio piece that then later led to a work. There she is standing on the water, because it's very much like what you see on the bottom of the pool. That led to a work for Georgia Institute of Technology, which I made a few years ago, where I basically used low-level 3D printing to make a pretty large public piece in that same style. So that what you saw first here, that's all, every color is one 3D print, then it's glued together and sealed, and we hang it up there for drying, basically, and repeatedly dipping. So we can take these pieces and individually directly cast them. So it's like lost wax casting, you're familiar with that probably, but instead of wax, it's plastic that has been 3D printed. And so here they are on my truck in bronze, and then we weld them all together and have the piece, in principle, and then lots of tooling, of course. And so the idea here is, I don't have a photo of that, unfortunately, but the vegetation is supposed to grow through it, so I have to get a new photo of that. That's, in Atlanta. Then I made other pieces in bronze, also driven by that idea. And then here I can stop for a second if there's a question. No? Okay. So then I mentioned in the beginning, I talked about the buckyball experiment, about the light and stuff. So the big question, of course, is what would it feel like, if you were that buckyball, you go through this double slit experiment, you are you are a particle, if you will, and then back there you are a particle again, but what's going on in between? And if you look at the mathematics of quantum physics, it just says basically any chunk of matter going this way would need to be represented as wave fronts going that way. And that idea led to this piece. So I was thinking of, if I'm the quantum object, I'm walking through space this way, then I would need to be out of wave fronts this way. And so I made this piece without really thinking much about it. And it's 8 feet tall, so I carved it out of styrofoam, and then I plasma cut it out of steel and put it all together. And it turned out this thing disappears from the side, and it looks solid from the other side, which is kind of perfect. It's like exactly what kind of quantum physics has. It has this, it's very much dependent on how you look at a situation. It can be completely different. And so since 2006, when I made my first piece, I embarked on a journey of making more in that direction. Here's a stainless piece, there's a bronze piece. Here's a stainless piece that you can't see, but it's there. That's the head, that's the arm, that's the body, and here's the legs. Yeah, there's no Photoshop, I promise.
20 minutes,
20 minutes, perfect. Okay, and then and in 2012 I started using 3D scanning and became really interested in very realistic kind of renderings of that, using the same idea. This is a public piece for a physics and nanotech building, and I wanted to talk about the idea of the yin-yang, if you will. In physics, there's always the matter and antimatter, the opposites, plus and minus. And so I made the man and the woman kneeling in a very meditative pose. He's a little bit more on edge, she's a little bit more calm. He's kind of in front of his building, she's from the outside. And they love each other, but they can never see each other. As you can see, if you look straight along that direction, there's not much steel, and that little bit that's there reflects the colors of the environment. So I'm showing that video because it's kind of hard to explain that effect. So then there's so many things that make so much sense. The one that you look from different perspectives and it's very different. Then also many things mesh really with Buddhism. I found that they talk for millennia about that at the bottom of things there's nothing, and that's kind of what I was trying to talk about in this piece. So I took a traditional Buddha and then made it out of bronze in slices. And then I got into light and I explored that a little bit. Here's 2 photos of a temporary installation. Now this piece is in Texas, in Dallas, permanently installed at the Virgin Hotel there. And some more experiments with light. This is very photogenic, as you can imagine. It's been pretty viral online, which is great. And then I think that's probably the last piece I'm showing, maybe one of the last pieces. This is for a science-based real estate place in San Diego. They do all the biotech there. They rent out lab space and office space. And I kept talking with all the people, and what I kept hearing was receptor. So many drugs are based on the idea that you have a protein, by the way, that fits exactly into another protein to do something or block something. And so that idea was intriguing to me. So I had, as an analogy to the idea of we are searching for our complement, and we want to have it and become whole. And so he has a cutout in his head, which is really hard to see. You have to walk around and kind of figure that out for yourself. That's exactly the sphere that's hanging there, the same size, 60-inch diameter. So there's this golden sphere, and he is kind of always looking at it and never gets it. So that will conclude my talk. And thank you very much for your attention. This is my studio, by the way. So if you find yourself in Portland, drop by and see what we're doing there. Thank you.